order at 7:08 p.m. Has there been a declaration of public notice?
Yes, there has.
All right. Order of business. Are there any public appearances today?
No, there are none.
All right. All right, so going on to the consent agenda, can I please have a motion?
I make the motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
And can I have a roll call vote? Susan Manning,
Aye.
Andrew,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Lorene, aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Next is recognitions.
Okay, to have two this evening. First, we'd like to recognize the Vetter family, which include Monona Grove alumni and athletes Jesse, Joe, John, and Jake Vetter. They hosted the Vetter Golf Classic in August and raised over $12,000 for the Monona Grove High School Silver Eagles. Our thanks to the Vetter family and everyone who supported this event for our students. The Vetter family is planning to make the Golf Out an annual event, and there's a link to some photos with the check presentation.
So
And
Dan, I just want to add that Kelly Vetter is married to Jake Vetter, and she was our TOSA at Winnequa School. So again, another part, she also is an MG grad, class of 2001.
thank you. So tonight marks the final school board meeting for Joyce Hamm, who is our executive assistant to the superintendent. Joyce has been an integral team member for our team with a rich history in our district as a student herself, a community member, a parent, and an employee for over 11 years. Earlier this summer, Joyce submitted her retirement notice effective October 1st. While we will all miss her greatly, we're also happy for Joyce and the new adventures that await her. Joyce's shoes are impossible to fill, but we are also thrilled to welcome Tish Mazarik to our team. Tish has been the administrative assistant to the principal at Winnequa School for the past 4 years. She began in her new role this week, and please join me in congratulating Joyce and welcoming Tish.
Hey, Joyce, I can't find the crying reaction on here, so
I got tears here, so.
I'll put
You
another.
will be sorely missed.
Yeah,
Very
I'll
much.
put another heart on there. There we go.
Thank you.
All right, next are announcements.
Okay, we have none this evening.
All right. Administrative reports.
Okay, just a short report tonight. Since the last time that we met, just wanted to update you. We've talked about some of the challenges that we have with staffing, like all school districts are experiencing right now, and two particular areas that are really important that I wanted to share a little bit about the work that's being done. First of all, with our health services team, specifically our school nurses and health assistants. I want to remind the board that last year during our pandemic, we did increase our FTE for health assistants by 1.5 positions. And so we have a total of 5 full-time people, 2 full-time nurses, 3 full-time health assistants. We went into the year feeling good that we were properly staffed, and real quickly realized that we're not. And we're not unlike a number of other districts. We've all are experiencing the same thing. They are doing an absolute fabulous job. But the big thing is, as far as contact tracing and communication with parents, even answering questions about their children and symptoms, is a very time consuming and includes evenings and weekends. And so I want the board to know that we are looking at adding additional staff to support in those areas. And we do have a couple of folks who have worked for us as substitutes or part-time in the past that we'll be reaching out to first. And I'll give you another report, in the future as we whatever we land on doing with that total. But we think that this just is critical. And as I said, the people we have been doing a fabulous job, but we need more support with that. So any questions regarding the health services staffing?
Eric?
Dan, I think I emailed you about this too. Just wondering, is the health services staff doing some of the contact tracing, also reaching out to families for cases that we have in the district, and how much time is that consuming with that staff?
Yeah, it's very time consuming, and yes, they are doing it for all of the contact tracing, and Krista, of course, and her team are supporting that. But maybe Krista, you want to speak to that a little bit specifically about what their duties are.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah, and Krista, before you start, I don't think I have I have a friend who's a contact tracer, so they've kind of filled me in on the details and the in-depth work that's required. So I would say don't be shy on what that looks like, because I found out and I was shocked at the time how time consuming it was. So
yeah. So as Dan said, they are doing the contact tracing for every single case we have in the school, and then students who are close contact. So yes, it's a pretty monumental task. It looks a little different than last spring as well, like that flexibility in the dates for return and things like that. Just it's a good thing. It just changes the process a little bit. So we've met several times to revise and streamline, and we met again today and just throwing out some different ideas. So yes, so we have families notifying us, which is really great. Families, like, my child is sick, it has these symptoms, here's what I think I should do. Is this correct? There's those like constant stream of emails throughout the day and in the evening and on the weekends. And, our team, we've kind of divided up some of that responsibility to take some of the burden off the team during the evening and on the weekends, and sharing that using that MGSD contact tracing email. But of course, as you know, if there is an identified positive case, then that contact tracing, that's what turns it on, right? So then it's getting the team together, talking to the classroom teacher. Where's your seating chart? Was the child on the bus? What does that seating chart look like? Jared might be looking at the videos, or someone in the building might be looking at the videos. Related arts, where are their seating charts? Who was near that student? Those are like the school side of things. Then of course there's an interview with the student, interview with the family. Who did you play with? Depending on the age of the student. The older students are really good about reporting who they spent time with and narrowing that down. The younger students are, pretty good as well, but we've got a wide range of age of students, so they're interviewing them and really trying to narrow that down to really be accurate with our contact tracing. And as you've seen, we've really kept to a minimum the number of classroom closures. Even at the elementary level, we haven't had zero, but we've had, I think, a number we can be pretty proud of, because that team has worked on really closely identifying who are those actual close contacts. And then there's the follow-up with each one of those families and students as well too. Like, what does that mean? What are your options for quarantine? When can you come back? Where can you go to, like, following up on the exact test for steps, for testing, and then fielding all of those results in those things coming in back from families too. So we're really thankful for our families for really reading the communications and taking those steps. And but yeah, it's intense, and it's pretty much throughout the day. And as Dan mentioned, we have a great health team. They're also staffing health rooms, very busy health rooms during the day as well. So I think it's just the combination of those two things. So we're thrilled that students are back, and we've got 3,000 plus students in our buildings, but those make for some busy days for that group. So we do have a couple of folks who've stepped up to help in the short term. And as Dan said, we're looking at some more what we need to sustain us throughout this year. We felt pretty good about our staffing plan, back in the spring when we made it, and even through July. It didn't take long after the start of school to realize that this is, it's a lot. And as Dan said, other districts kind of having that realization too. So I think it's just important to know that the contact tracing is on the schools and the school teams to contact trace in the schools. We have, actually the communication with public health, like that's another layer of it, is communicating back some of this information to public health as well. That's another step in the task flow to communicate back with them as well. So lots of little details and lots to manage. And they're doing a fantastic job. I couldn't be asking them to do, any more or a better job than they are doing. It's just the sheer amount of work that's involved.
Thank you, Krista.
All right, thank you, Krista. All right, then also related to staffing, I wanted to give the board an update, our situation with substitute teachers. And as you know, there's been a shortage of substitute teachers for several years. And so when we aren't able to fill all positions, it falls on our current staff, where we ask teachers to help fill in during prep time and so on. And that's hard. That's a real challenge and burden on our staff. And especially given where we're at now, it's something we really are working hard to try not, to eliminate. So some of the things that we're doing to try to mitigate that staff shorting or that substitute teacher shortage. Last spring, while we were in both virtual as well as when we came back in person with hybrid, one of the things that we found effective is we hired a permanent building sub for every school, where someone was the substitute, the first person to be available if we had, on a daily basis, or even if it was a long-term, or even short-term for someone. And we found that really effective and very helpful to have someone that's familiar with our building all the time. And so when we started this school year, we made that decision to continue that with our elementary schools. And so we do have hires at each of the elementary. We didn't do the same thing at the middle and high school because it's a little bit different situation, and they have a little more flexibility in finding, people to cover. But we've quickly realized that, we still need some more support there as well. So we are going to be adding the same thing, building subs at the middle and high school, and actually even exploring the idea of a second one at the elementaries. Because right now at each of the elementaries, those building subs actually are assigned to someone who's out on a long-term leave. And so they're not available for the day-to-day subbing. So it's been important to have those folks, but we still need more support. So we're like everyone else, we're competing with substitute teachers with all the other schools in Dane County. So to have a commitment and have people in our district, in our buildings, we think is the way to go. As far as how do we finance this? Well, one thing to keep in mind is last year, that was one of the areas where we really underspent our budget was substitutes, because, obviously with virtual, we didn't have that same need. And so we, now that money doesn't just carry over to the next year budget. That obviously not the way school finance works. But the reality is we were able to add some money to fund balance last year, and that part of the reason. So if we do end up overspending our substitute budget just a little bit, well, so be it. It's important that we have those positions filled, and it's a little bit easier to swallow since we know that we underspent it a year ago. So that's something I'll keep you informed of as we go along, but definitely at the top of our list of importance to have substitutes available, for our buildings.
Dan, do you feel confident that we will be able to secure subs?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of times on our long-term subs, we do have, you may recall, we use a service, Teachers on Call, for our daily substitutions. When we have long-terms, we do have a number of people who have worked regularly for us in the past, and that we'll call on. So right now it is going to be a challenge. I can't say that it's a certainty that we'll be able to find permanent people, for this semester. We talked about another opportunity is mid-year graduates at semester time as well, and which hits before the winter, season. So I think it'll be an ongoing search, this entire year. So,
Elizabeth?
How does the salary structure work for if you're a permanent sub?
Yeah. So there are different tiers, of the daily subs. When we have someone that's a long-term sub, our daily rate is equivalent to a first-year teacher, rate, teacher salary that's prorated. So I think it comes out to, I think it's about $215 a day, of that effect. And then they are also eligible for benefits once they've been with us for 3 months.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Doesn't appear to be any other questions. Next are board reports. So Policy Committee, Susan Manning.
The Policy Committee met on Thursday, September 16th, 2021, and for consideration of Policy 2018, Equity in Education. This policy is returning to the Policy Committee after further work by the administrative staff. After review by the committee, discussion and modification, this policy was approved and is going to be presented for its first read in the meeting tonight of the full board. Our future agenda items include the Neola packet, volume 30, number 2, and which is approximately a total of ultimately 40 policies. And then the committee is going to continue to discuss the SRO related policies and the ability to just put board thoughts that are governance thoughts into, if they're needed, into the policies. We're meeting tomorrow morning at 8:15.
Perfect. And next is the MGEF. Susan
Yep.
Manning.
So the Monona Grove Education Foundation met on September 14th, 2021, and the critical item that they're discussing right now, beyond all the other work that they do, is that the golf ball drop is scheduled for Saturday, October 2nd at 10 a.m. at Winnequa Dream Park, if you want to come down and watch that. We are encouraging and urging each and every one of you to buy some tickets from board members, and it's also on their webpage. At the meeting on September 14th, there was a superintendent report, an update on back to school and COVID processes. And one of the interesting things was there were quite a few questions about back to school and the COVID numbers that were answered in the superintendent report. There was also an announcement about the Ahern Diversity and Inclusion Scholarship with the Ahern Run, scheduled for last Saturday. So if anybody was there, that would be nice to hear about it. To honor a wonderful woman who is committed to equality in the community of this district. Nancy Kugel donated a whole sponsorship to the Dane Rogers Memorial Golf Outing in the name of the Monona Grove Education Foundation. And for those of you who, Dane Rogers actually was a student at Monona Grove who died of blue algae exposure. It was very tragic for the students that were in the high school at the time. It was difficult to diagnose and ultimately untreatable. And he was actually at that time goalie of the soccer team. Great, wonderful kid. So for the golf ball drop, all the funds will benefit the new Pay It Forward program in the Monona Grove Education Foundation Teacher Innovation Grants. Pay It Forward is this great program. It's a new program to provide extra support to Monona Grove students struggling with food, stability, or clothing, and those needing additional tutoring programs and/or assistance with virtual learning and mental health programs. The Monona Grove Education Foundation Teacher Innovation Grants support teachers' efforts to bring innovative new ideas and programs into the district that fall outside of traditional funding. There was also discussion at the end of the meeting for how current donations will be utilized. And at the next meeting, they're planning to invite the high school and middle school principals to speak about how the funds are utilized and where Monona Grove education funding may be used. There was also some discussion about inviting students at a later date. It was a really, really good meeting. That's it.
Thank you, Susan. And I'm glad you did mention the Ahern Diversity and Inclusion Walk Run. It was a huge success. I was the co-chair for the event and we exceeded the registration. So it was a great success. Over 100 attendees came and participated. So again, this was sponsored by our Monona Police Department, and our fire department was also involved. So it was just a perfect day because the weather was great and everyone was really, really happy. So a great success, and hopefully we'll keep going with this every year. So
I think that's a wonderful idea. And the thing is, for those who knew Anne, you can just see her face smiling while we're doing these things. Again, she helped form the Friends program at Cottage Grove School, and these were just great experiences that she brought to us. So it's wonderful that we can do something fun like that in her honor that she would have enjoyed. It's really nice.
Thank you. All right, next is the mandatory COVID vaccination for employees. On board docs, it is listed as a possible action item, but we're going to move it for a vote for the next board meeting, simply because we have two board members that are out today, and I think it's best that we're all here for this vote. Okay.
And Lorraine,
yes.
can I just ask a question? Is there some process that we could use to try and expand the responses to the survey as well? Just because if we're so close, we're with 150, and if we could bring that up a few more numbers, I think that would really strongly reinforce our ability to move forward. The other thing I'm going to ask for, and again, I think I so appreciate Brian being here. It would be nice. I know that Milwaukee actually passed this mandate, and I don't know what format, whether that was in a policy or in a resolution. It would be nice to be able to see that, what they had passed, and also if there's a draft of the Madison document, and any written documents from and from Mindy and the education or personnel committee. It just makes the process so much easier if you have solid background as you move forward. That would be great.
Thank you, Susan. Eric?
Lori, actually, I'm not so, I don't really agree with that, postponing it, because my reasoning is we still have a quorum. And I think if you start to get into postponing for certain reasons, then other board members could say, well, I wasn't at that meeting. Can we postpone that vote? And that could carry on for lots of different, there's been things I've wanted to vote on that I wasn't able to show up on. I've even made requests to, and it's happened anyways. I completely understand that, but I mean, we can't continue, we can't have this kind of like set a precedent. Well, if board members aren't present, then we're going to postpone votes on things. That does concern me a little bit because of that. So, and I don't really think this is an issue. I mean, I think we are pretty clear on what the other board members think based on the previous board meeting. So it's not like we would be voting on something that would be immensely controversial based on their opinions. So.
Okay, that's valid, Eric. Elizabeth?
I agree with Eric.
Okay. Susan?
I also agree that the reason for waiting is not because of the presence of the board members. It's my understanding, and that I went back and watched the meeting, was that one of the things the board wanted, and Elizabeth was one of the ones that brought that forward, and I support and respect that. And that is trying to get finality or validity to the survey. The other thing was, I think we were under the impression that we would be getting very clear feedback from the teachers union as well. And maybe I missed that. Maybe that got posted. I checked this afternoon. I just think there are a couple documents. I think the reason for the wait, and I would be happy to schedule a special meeting just to do this in a week, to give Dan 7 days. We gave him kind of a short window on the survey to try and get 100 more responses to the survey. Then we're going to be right in the middle and have good numbers on that. And it may bring some board members a comfort feel. It was my impression that's kind of the thought process that's going on here. And that in fact, since other school districts and major school districts are doing the same thing, you basically have two choices. You may want to just move forward, or you may want to see their samples to see what their language is as well.
And then, okay, go ahead.
I'm like with Eric and Elizabeth. I thought we made it perfectly clear a couple of weeks ago in discussions. I don't know if we're trying to discuss more about it. I think I've been clear of what my decision is going to be. But I would love to hear what we have Brian Gutman here to speak on some of the things. And if you'd like to add on, but I already know my decision. So I wouldn't even need no more information or anything. I've seen the emails, I've seen, some things here and there, but I've already made my decision. So it'll be up to Lorraine and the rest of the board. If we want to vote on this, or are we going to go into further discussion? It's okay to discuss, but I've already made my decision and I'm sticking with it. So.
Then I respect the majority of board members are saying that they want to move forward with a vote, then we should continue with that. So we can continue with the vote.
Oh,
All
okay.
right, Dan, I'll let you take over from here. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
I just wanted to also say that one of the things I want to see in this process is the process that administration is going to use for the federally required exceptions. And we don't need that for this vote tonight, but depending upon how the vote comes out, I think that's going to be a critical piece that this board needs to be informed about. So I'm just saying, we need to make sure that we're a well-informed board as we move forward.
So just I think if we can let both Brian and Dan just kind of present and then we ask questions afterwards, just, okay. And then Eric, if you have a quick.
Well, I was going to say, I would like to make the motion first and then we can go into discussion. And then
Go for it.
So I'll make a motion to approve the following, whereas bylaw 0131.1 provides that the board may immediately adopt a policy due to compelling reasons, whereas compelling reasons of public health and safety justify adopting a vaccine policy immediately. Now, therefore, the board immediately adopts the Monona Grove School District COVID-19 vaccination policy as submitted with effective dates as specified in that policy.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
Do we want to hear from
Yeah, well, that's when Dan and Brian can go ahead and present.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you. I'll go and begin. I'll just talk a little bit about the process and what we did since from the last board meeting until tonight, and then Brian can answer any specifics about the policy and any other questions. So based upon the dialogue of the last board meeting, I followed up with Attorney Goodman as well. Mike Jelka was part of that conversation as well to draft a policy for the board consideration. And the other thing that we did is, as far as the survey, did work with our own human resources department to determine the best way to gather this data from our staff in a secure way. And so you'll see that we did then by Friday following the meeting, get the survey out to our staff. We did a reminder email to them this week. And it was noted the survey responses as of today, we had 507 responses out of 657 total employees, which I think is an excellent response rate, for a week. Keep in mind that of those 657 employees, that's all employees. So many of those are part-time people who, even though everyone has a Monona Grove email account, may not be checking regularly. And so that will be the next step, is to be able to start following up on some of the people who have not responded and try to reach out and contact them directly. But at this point, we've been busy working on the compilation of the data that we do have. And that's, been the process with regard, to the survey. So with that, well, let me pause there about that process, and then we can turn it over and talk about the specifics of the actual policy.
Elizabeth?
I just wanted to confirm, Dan, when you sent out this survey, you requested that folks also send their proof of vaccination along with the survey results, correct? So this number that we have of 97%, you have their vaccination status and their documentation already.
That is correct. And it was a decision that we made, that knowing that it was very possible the board might adopt this
Yeah, it was smart.
policy, that we're going to have to collect it anyway. So we thought we'd do it right from the get-go.
It was very efficient. So kudos to efficiency.
And there's no further-
Just
Oh,
one quick
Eric?
question, sorry. Dan, do we have any exemptions, employees that chose to do one of the exemptions? Or do we
Sure. I
know?
think I'm going to let Brian speak to that. That would actually come later, but we've talked a lot about that process, and Susan had a similar question about how that would work. So we can certainly speak to that.
So Brian, I think-
I don't know, Brian, if you'd like to speak to the ADA component.
Yeah,
and-
oh, I'm absolutely happy to. Sorry, I thought you wanted to talk about the policy first. I was going to give you first crack. Yes, and I want to be clear. There are federal laws, there are also state laws that are implicated when you're talking about any kind of a policy on an employee. Employees have rights under state and federal law for certain accommodations. They're called reasonable accommodations, so long as they do not pose an undue hardship on the district. And the basis for those requests can be because of an employee's disability status, that their disability prohibits them from complying with the board policy. Then you have to engage in what we call the interactive process to determine if there's a reasonable accommodation that does not pose an undue hardship. And that's under both state discrimination law and federal. So you do not need to put that into the policy, because you would have to put that in literally every policy you have if that were the case, because any policy would be subject to potential accommodations based on disability. And the federal law doesn't care if you put it in their policy, because you have to comply with it. And so that's why it's not in this policy, because it's not in every one of your policies. And you do have an ADA accommodation policy. So it is spelled out in another policy. The other basis for an accommodation, and this one only comes under federal law, you have to provide reasonable accommodations for someone whose religious beliefs prohibit them from complying with a board policy. And in the case of vaccination, that does come up. I have already guided some other clients through those issues. And it is a request for accommodations. It is a reasonable accommodation standard, and it is an undue hardship standard. But what's interesting, and at least if you're a lawyer, is that the standard, the word undue hardship, in as far as religious accommodations, actually doesn't require the district to do as much as an undue hardship standard for disability. I didn't write the federal law. The ADA versus Title VII is what we're talking about. And the basis is different. And undue hardship for religious accommodations is anything that poses more than a de minimis cost to the district. If it costs you basically anything, you do not have to do it. And why I bring this up is because these legal principles are directly implicated in how this policy will be administered. So if the board were to adopt this policy tonight, it would take effect, and employees would have to come into compliance by December 1st by getting a vaccination. If someone cannot get vaccinated because of a disability, such as, let's say, a severe fear of needles or a history of allergic reactions to vaccines, we would begin the interactive process. So they would contact HR, they'd call Nicole, and would explain the situation. We'd probably ask for some documentation from the doctor and just get a sense for what's going on and what accommodations could be put in place. And it's individualized. So it's individualized based on what this employee does. and it's individualized based on the medical disability that they are citing as the basis for this. And I don't believe in a cookie cutter approach to accommodations. I think you do a better job of assessing each one individually and based on what exactly is going on and what they do. But examples of accommodations can include, and as we already have, face masking in place, but continuing that regardless of other policies, right? Even if the Dane County lifted the order, you might keep this in place. You could have, again, increased social distancing for these employees. You could have weekly testing, but as Dr. Olson and I have talked about, the medical community is not universal in that that's good enough, right? In its own, as a standalone alternative to vaccination. Vaccination is like way up here. You can't quite see my hand. I'm way up here. And the testing is a part two, and it can't be used in isolation. So again, I want to reiterate that you will have to comply with the federal law, but you're going to treat each person as an individual on their where they're at. You're going to find them where they're at and work with them. The idea being, if you have a bona fide disability, we're going to find a way to work that out, unless it's a hardship. And frankly, it probably won't be. It will probably be able to find a way to make it work out. With religious beliefs, we can't ask the same questions. We can't require documentation from a cleric or a priest. If someone has that, we can certainly take it. It can certainly help. It's just people's religious beliefs can be personal and not tied to an organized religion. And in that case, we would take the documentation that we receive. We would review it. We might ask a few follow-up questions depending on what we get. Evaluate if it's a sincerely held, a bona fide religious belief. If that is the case, then we consider accommodations. They'll look a lot like the accommodations for disability. But again, we'll then assess whether it poses an undue hardship, and that will be the basis for whether or not we would approve such an accommodation. One thing I want to be very clear about, this is sort of my hill to die on with COVID stuff right now, and that is I am encouraging the use of the term accommodation and not the use of the word exemption. Because yes, as part of their request for accommodation, they will be exempt from this policy. They won't necessarily be vaccinated, but that's not the end of it. It's not, okay, my religious belief says I can't get vaccinated, so I'm good, I'm done. No, there'll be other steps put in place to ensure safety of the students in the community. So I just think I've been hearing the word exemption used a lot as sort of a get out of jail free card kind of mentality. It's not going to be what it is. These will be documentation, will be questions asked. We're going to go through the process because the process was what will get to the best outcome for both the employees and the district and protect against liability. And the case law and the interactive process for disability has been around for quite some time. It is a process that the administration is familiar with, and that certainly legal counsel will be brought in on to assist. And the religious accommodation issue is interesting because it's just becoming a lot more used than it ever had been in the past with respect to these COVID-19 issues. So we are going to be very careful and diligent in making sure as best we can that that the district's interests are protected, whether that be public health, whether that be employment. But that's kind of the process. And now none of those words are in your policy. And you might be like, well, why aren't they in the policy? And the answer is because that's the law. And because if we try to spell all that out, well, inevitably, one word will be interpreted differently by someone else. It's not how I would draft a policy. I would draft it, here's what you got to do by this time. And then I would let employees know, like we do with any policy, if there is an issue, reach out to HR. But if someone just says, I don't want to get vaccinated, I don't trust the FDA, that's not a basis to get out of this policy. And I think that's really important to understand, because I want the district to know that some of the other policies that you talked about in other districts, their policy is get vaccinated or choose a weekly testing option. Our policy as drafted is get vaccinated. And if you can't get vaccinated, consider accommodations, which might include a testing component. With a lot of talk about these vax or testing policies, President Biden's OSHA mandate also is framed that way. And it gives it the idea that both options are equally good. And we've heard from Dr. Olson, some of the doctors that he has talked to, it's simply not the case. Both aren't as good. And vaccination is, to my understanding, the board's strong preference. And so the only people that would get access to a testing option would do so for those two bases that would prevent them from getting vaccinated, and only with other steps that may protect public health of the district. So I want to be careful about that. And I think that's part of the path that you're on. And I wanted you to understand that. So with that, I can take questions.
Eric?
Okay, Brian, you like this one. So we have an employee who identifies as a Catholic and says that they want a religious accommodation.
Mhm.
What do we do then? Since the Pope and the Catholics have said that vaccinations are safe and the church agrees with it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that question, Eric. And I have commented on that question to many a client, and it's an interesting answer. And the answer is someone's individual religious beliefs can be more conservative than the organization to which they belong. I jokingly refer to it as you can be holier than the Pope. The law would protect that. So yes, the Pope has said you can get vaccinated, but the Pope also says that the church will respect individual conscience decisions. So to that end, someone could say, I am Catholic. I do understand what the Catholic Church has said, but my belief is different than that. It is more protected. And I think that's an exact case where if it's a sincerely held religious belief, this is a practicing Catholic, there's no reason to doubt them, then we go to the accommodation process for that individual. And we would talk about social distancing, masking, testing, things like that. And that would be our obligation.
Okay, I think that answers all the questions regarding that. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So first of all, I appreciate you, Brian. I enjoy anytime we're sharing space together. So thank you for being you. I also really appreciate the level of nuance that you've brought to this around, the languaging pieces. So talking about accommodations versus exceptions, that makes a lot of sense to me, especially as we're framing it up. And I actually really appreciate that this policy is very straightforward and there's no like false equivalency being drawn. It's not conflated with anything else. It's just the get vaccinated component. So I have no questions about the policy itself. I think it makes a lot of sense to me. I think the nuances that you laid out make a lot of sense too. And so hopefully for folks who are watching this, they'll be able to appreciate that as well. I have a question for you though, Dan, in regards to what have we thought about in terms of hosting a vaccination clinic on site to support people getting vaccinated?
Yeah, so you're aware, of course, that there is a program as far as having schools access to testing. So the tests themselves, we do have access to. The challenge we have is to do the testing, and as you mentioned, it's the same people we talked about that our health team who are doing the contact tracing are also the ones trained with that, and that is something we don't have the capacity to do right now with our staff. What we are working on is we have been provided a partner, and we're working on trying to get them to staff on-site testing. Of all the school districts who have participated, some have been successful in getting their partner to do that, and others haven't. And we just talked about it this past week with our folks at Public Health, and the message, keep on them and keep trying to work that out. So we will work very hard to try to have on-site testing available, not only in this case for potentially for staff, but for our students as well, and for convenience. But we don't have that in place at this moment.
So I appreciate that. And maybe I misspoke and said testing when I meant to say vaccine clinic. I was wondering if we were thinking about hosting a vaccine clinic. As in regards to testing, Brian's 100% spot on in regards to the complications with testing. The likelihood that you end up with a false positive will be really high, especially with the speedier test, which is going to be more disruptive. And given our sub shortages anyway, I think that's just a complicating factor that is like not strictly necessary, except for, as Brian said, on a case-by-case basis where, we might say yes for this person, but no, maybe for this one. Yep. But I was thinking specifically for vaccine clinics for the 25% of our staff who either didn't respond or responded that they aren't vaccinated, so that we can make it easier, more accessible, right? And increase the likelihood of compliance.
Sure. And you may have very well said that, and I was thinking in my mind testing. So,
Sorry, we can watch the tape later, Dan, and see who was right.
yeah. So I agree with you. We absolutely want to make it as accessible as possible. Right now, it is very easy to have access at the various sites. There's no wait at all. And so to me, we have two options. We either make it available, and I would say it would be reasonable to allow employees on school time, if need be, to do that, or we bring it on site. But I agree. We definitely want to make it accessible as possible for employees.
I assume we run a flu clinic, right? So would it be similar to, yeah, so I would imagine it'd be similar to that.
And we actually did host on site last spring.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, yeah. And we had some that participated. And so I'm sure that we would be able to do that again.
Cool. Thank you.
Dan, will we have subs, or do you have a strategy in place for those that get vaccinated and may need some time off after they receive the vaccines?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a legitimate concern, obviously, with the sub shortage. And so that would be something too, that perhaps trying to work with the employees about, when the best time would be as well. And that was best for them as well as the district. So that's something we definitely would have to be cognizant of, about the timing.
Dan, if I can just interject, we talked a lot about the timing of when the deadline would be. And we set December 1st, which is more time than an employee would need to get vaccinated. And that's part of it, right? It gives them time to find a mutually agreeable time or to bring in a clinic. So that's where we came up with the December 1st number that gave employees some planning time and the district some planning time.
Thank you, Brian. Susan Manning, did you have a question? No. Okay. All right. So it doesn't appear to be any other questions. So I guess we can go to our roll call vote. All right, starting with Susan Manning.
Aye.
Andrew.
Nay.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Lorene. Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. All right. Moving on to discussion items. T4K agreement with Immaculate Heart of Mary.
Okay, and I've asked Brian to stay on to answer questions about this discussion item as well. So I had informed the board just through a memo. We have not had any previous discussion about this, but that we had a concern brought to our attention about the real issue is having a partner in the 4K program that's housed in a religious school and with religious symbols and so on, and that is legally problematic as far as having that as part of our public school program. Our T4K program has been in existence for 12 years. IHM has been a community partner that entire time. During that time, of course, I've been in the district now, this is my 9th year. This is the first time that any concern had ever been brought to my attention. I have since learned that there have been some concerns brought to our administrators' attention that have been, dealt with in the past. But based upon that, I did consult with our legal team about, are there legitimate concerns about the way the program is operating and about how it could or should, in the future. So if it's okay, I'd like to have Brian just speak a little bit to that and what the issue is and why this is legally problematic.
Thanks, Dr. Olson. So the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees the free exercise of religion and prohibits the establishment of religion, and that applies all the way down at the district level. And there is no categorical prohibition on contracting with religious organizations to provide services or spaces. It's not categorical like that. Instead, what you need to do is make sure that these relationships can be set up in such a way that it doesn't give the appearance of the endorsement of a specific religion. And that's what gets challenging in an active, religious school. Because at the same time, your students are going for a secular education, or other students using the same facilities for a religious instruction. And so, some of the various factors that courts would look at is simply like, what kind of iconography is present, while the students are receiving their instruction? Are they passing underneath crucifixes, passing by Bible verses in the hallways? And it just gets really hard for a district to balance its interests in maintaining that, the appearance of neutrality in a space where the organization is candidly doing the opposite for its students. And so again, these are fact-specific cases. I'm not getting into the weeds of any particular complaint, but simply to say, there are steps that can be taken, have been taken, and are taking, to limit this. But I think just going forward, as Dr. Olson explained, there's space in your buildings to run these programs, and that just avoids the issue.
All right.
So we have space to run the programs. That's what we're saying. That's what you're saying, Dan?
We do. So currently at Winnequa School, we have 2 classrooms that are set up as 4K classrooms. Of course, there's an AM and PM class. We actually currently only run 3 sections. We have, in one of the classrooms, there's only an AM section. So our priority, of course, is meeting the needs of our resident students. And right now, and historically, we likely would able to place all of our resident students in those 3 sections, but we have the ability to add that 4th section if need be to accommodate our students. Open enrollment students, of course, can be placed wherever we have space. And of course, now we have additional space at Taylor Prairie that any open enrollment students could be placed at if there's not space, at Winnequa. So the answer is yes, very clearly, we definitely have space for our students.
But we didn't previously, which is why we use this option.
Right. When the program began, and in fact, until this year, with the new school opening, there definitely was a space issue district-wide. Yeah.
Susan?
Dan, just to give a little more history here, according to Connie at the time, the issue wasn't just space. There was funding for programs that were set up, I think, with attached daycare. And Immaculate had that program, as well as some of the daycare facilities. So that was a major factor in that decision at that time.
Yep. Thank you, Susan.
It wasn't just space.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be clear that no one did anything wrong here. When the program was set up, the district chose to choose a program that offered a combination of space in the buildings as well as community partners. And that many districts had, similar relationships. They went through all the, DPI has very clear, recommendations and guidance about how you do that. So I think everything was done with the best of intentions and to follow the rules. And you're right, things have shifted since then. But you're right, space was only a consideration at that time, I believe.
And the legal framework has evolved since that time too. And so that's, a consideration. And when you have the space and you can avoid this ongoing, potential issue, it became an issue of how do we solve this problem? And the easier solution was bring it in house, most likely.
That's a bit ironic coming from a lawyer saying that the legal framework has evolved since this time, but I'll accept it, I guess.
Elizabeth?
Is this the last of our community partnerships for 4K, Dan?
It
So
is.
all
Yeah.
of our programming's in-house now?
Correct.
On an interrelated note, have we thought about supporting our own aftercare, before and after care programming?
We have. And so one of the things that's really important, and I want to be clear that the conversation I had with Kelly Miller, the principal at IHM, is part of one of the things they offer, as well as wraparound care. And we do continue to partner with other community sites as far as working with them with transportation to kids to and from those places. But we do also know that particularly in Cottage Grove, there is a real shortage of opportunity. And so you actually are going to be hearing some sometime soon a recommendation for a pilot program that we offer our own wraparound. So right now we're focusing on that at Cottage Grove. Emily Foster is leading that, and so more to come on that. So
Great. Music to my ears, Dan. It's a huge equity issue.
All right, it doesn't appear to be any further questions. Right, next is policy revisions, deletions, first reading.
And I will take my leave. You don't need me for this one. Good night, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Good night, Brian.
okay, Susan, you want me to kick this one off, or would you like to?
I think it's important, Dan. What I guess the piece that I think would be helpful for them to understand is how the equity policy evolved, because effectively the policy was written and then came to the policy committee for review. So I think it's important for the board to understand the evolution of the actual written policy.
Yep, absolutely. So
That would be great if you would do that.
sure. So
And
this has
then
been a work in progress for probably a good 3 years. And it really stemmed out of the work that we were doing in the district, and really, specifically the ICS equity work about trying to put in policy some of the practices that we have in the district. And so we started with just a very rough draft of a policy, as I mentioned, about 3 years ago. Our policy committee had some, initial discussions and review of that. And we, I think, all were on the same page, concluded that we weren't quite ready to adopt it as is. A number of the things in that initial draft were more aspirational than what we actually were having, done in practice. And so then it moved on to the Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee. And under Eric's leadership, that committee had a lot of dialogue and discussion and looked closely at the concept of an equity policy. And ultimately, what that committee landed on doing is, rather than writing a policy, they created a statement on equity for the district. And that did come to the board for approval. That was adopted a little over a year ago. And that is the first paragraph in this policy, is to incorporate that statement on equity that was done previously by the board and adopted. And so from there, we wanted to build upon that statement and into more of a true policy that give us direction about how we actually, how it impacts our students and our teaching and learning. And so the it went back to the policy committee to talk a little bit about that process and what some of those key components might be. And then from there, we took it back to our admin team and teacher leadership team to come up with a next draft. And so what you have before you, we had a couple iterations of this. And so we came up with a draft. We took to the policy committee. They reviewed it over a couple meetings, had some really good suggestions and revisions to it. And ultimately tonight, what you have is the end result of that 3 years of work of a lot of various stakeholders to bring forth in policy that is consistent with, I believe, hopefully our beliefs as well as our actions in with regard to how we are supporting our teachers and students.
Yeah, and I would like to reiterate that Dan led a group, and if as a board you have a question about who is involved in that group, he's here to answer that question. But effectively, what the committee did was we reviewed a variety of sample policies and looked for components that we thought were important to be in there, maybe a definition or maybe clarity. And that's really the role, and Elizabeth, feel free to add to that we played. We did not, this was a team effort of individuals who put this policy together. And the committee actually was the review team.
Right, it doesn't appear to be any questions. All right, we can move on to strategic planning.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to have this as just a preliminary discussion about the strategic planning process. This is something, of course, that is owned by the board, but it's something that we all work together on. And so what I put on board docs was just a little bit of background information from the process that we went through back in 2016. By no means do we have to follow the same process. But I just want to remind the board members that when we wrote that, it was intended to be a 4-year plan. Of course, then, and with last year being the year that we were going to write a new plan, that got put on pause because of the COVID pandemic. And it is important, I think, that we pick up this work. And there's a lot of different options about how we approach it. We can do something very similar. We can do something very different. But I just thought it would be good to initiate that conversation. Our Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee as well has had some preliminary conversation about how this might impact, again, the teaching and learning, in our district. Well, and I think also the equity policy, if it's approved at the next meeting as well, will be a real important piece to build off of about how might that strategic plan support that policy. So tonight is just an opportunity to introduce it. Any initial thoughts about process? And this is something that typically the board would engage in workshops to do this work. It's too important and too time consuming to try to, really do in depth at a regular board meeting. But tonight, just to get your initial thoughts about process, and if that makes sense with regard to the timeline, and I can share if we go into a workshop a little bit too about more detail about, do we have a facilitator? If so, what type of facilitator? And how is the board involved? How am I or our administrative team? What about other stakeholders? A lot to answer there. So why don't I pause and just, see what questions you have or comments about the process. And this is definitely a to be continued, conversation.
Susan Manning?
I think that the handout that you gave us that talked about the strategic plan and how this process went together is incredibly helpful. And I think Andrew may be able to comment on this as well, because that's where I met Rhoda. I mean, she was a great leader in this team. And I think putting together this group was very helpful. It really brought together teachers, parents, students, community members. The only thing I would change is there were only 2 board members there. And I think that made some board members feel hampered in terms of their input, even though it did come back later. Maybe what you want to do is figure out some kind of ex officio status where they can come and they actually can comment, but maybe not vote. So they'll feel welcome coming to watch. It's like Teaching, Learning, and Equity. That is one of the most interesting committees to watch, but we don't even send the Zoom connection out to the board. So I'm just saying, one of the pieces that I think we could modify with some thought is how to help the board feel involved in this initial put it together process. And so basically what they did is they used a process and a lot of input to start putting together focus areas. And then after the focus areas, then there was a stronger, smaller team that started actually putting together the plan. Joanne Sturkey was absolutely is great at this. She is very, very talented, as is Liz Mender. Using that kind of approach is very effective in helping you focus on the things that are important to the school district, I think. And if you look at the basically 5 focus areas they came up with, it's difficult not to want to go back and utilize the same focus areas. We just need to move forward because we're behind the track on doing this. The other thing I would strongly suggest is that have some discussion tonight, but I think it would be very helpful to schedule a board meeting, a special board meeting, a workshop, just to get particularly because many of the board members were not there when you were doing this, to get some feedback on the process and how it worked and what worked and what you, Dan, would improve in that process. So I would strongly suggest we set an evening that's going to be 2 hours where we work on this. Because we have a lot of expertise right here on this board. We have Eric and Elizabeth, Lorraine, and Andrew. And I mean, I want to make sure that all of you are involved and adding your input in this process.
All right, doesn't appear to be any other further questions or comments. Elizabeth?
Just that I agree with Susan Manning that I'd like a time to sit and actually like really where this is the focus, where we really think about it. I have a lot of thoughts around, you know, strategic planning versus a strategic framework. What about our current goals, right? What do we want to keep? And then, you know, figure out how we modify them and operationalize them. So, but I think like we need a dedicated time to actually sit and deconstruct all that. So I agree with Susan. And so whether it's us all as a board, whether the board wants it to go to a subcommittee like TLE, I'm comfortable with that too, but we need time to really think it through.
Eric and Andrew, I would like to hear your thoughts as well. Do you feel that we need a special board meeting for this?
I don't, but
Okay. Andrew?
I've been on it before. I really don't, but for the newer ones, you know, it'd probably be something that you should be able to do or look at. But I'm fine either way.
I think that's my thoughts too, is that either way, I'm okay.
Okay, can I recommend then that, you know, I'll work with Lorraine about, you know, where is appropriate and how, I will say, I do think at least one workshop with all board members might be beneficial to talk about, because there's a lot about it. We can talk more specifically about, you know, as Elizabeth said, about the different types. What is the difference between a strategic plan, a strategic framework? And then I think, you know, hopefully we can get consensus about how to move forward as far as the board's involvement. I mean, I can easily come forth with a recommendation for a plan, but I'd like to hear from some board members first before I do that, because I'm not tied to a specific way. You know, I think what we did last time around, I think worked and was a good process. As Susan mentioned, there's always things that we, in hindsight, could do differently. And so that would be my thought, is at least a workshop to talk through those things, to give me a little bit more direction to come up with a plan or a proposal for the board to consider.
Elizabeth?
I agree, Dan. So that sounds good to me. And depending on the timing, is it possible for that meeting that we could have like any kind of summary of like status on these goals, even if it's just like, you know, highest level possible? It doesn't have to be deep, but I think that would help the conversation too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, certainly at some point we need to have more of a formal, here's kind of the end result. But I think in the short term, the interim, you're right, you know, to what is the work that's been done. Okay, how have we done on this? No doubt that needs to be part of it. So
I love strategic planning. So I'll always say yes to another meeting about strategic planning.
You're good at it.
Susan?
Could we have, you know, let's get Joyce, well, we've still got a few more days here, to send out an email with some dates. I'm thinking it's the same kind of thing you've done with the workshop before, Dan. It's scheduled for 2 hours and it has structure in it. And then there's, you know, a structured way to get feedback. Again, we've got this expertise of these people who on the board who do these kinds of things. So I think it could be interesting.
I think it's great. So if it's okay, I'll be glad to put together a kind of a recommendation and some dates to share with the board and times and I would say, you know, within the next month, I think would be important. I don't wait too long.
Great suggestion, Susan. Thank you. All right, next, our future meeting dates. So they're all listed in board docs. Our next meeting is October 13th at 7 o'clock. And can I have a motion for adjournment, please?
Make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Meeting's adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.